All right, next we're going to look at rules and regulations. Anything you do, the government wants to be involved in it, right? They want to know that you're doing this, this, and this, you're jumping through this hoop, that hoop, or whatever. So we're going to talk about what you need to jump through as far as using a drone for any kind of commercial work, not necessarily land surveying, but since we are doing something for pay, we got to follow those commercial regulations as far as the remote pilot stuff. Does anybody in here have their remote pilot license? All right. All right. We got about probably 8 or 9 hands that went up. It's a good investment. You can ask these guys that raised their hand. It's not that difficult to get. Most of the times, if you just really want to, you can go to like a website. There's several reputable training companies that do a great job preparing you to take the Part 107. Most of the times you can get it on your own just with kind of studying, following a study guide that we've got for you, and looking at some YouTube videos. If you do want to go the paid route just to have some kind of formal instruction in it to make you take your test, a little quicker, faster, or just make you more confident, I'd recommend the Pilot Institute. That's a really good company as far as your Part 107 training.
Clemson Drone.
Yes, Clemson Drone, they do Part 107 now also. I'm not sure what the cost is, but I think they do online and in person, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So a lot of times, especially if you think you're going to have some trouble with like sectional charts or some of the things that may be on the test, it's not a bad idea to get that extra assistance, whether it's online or in person. All right. To fly a drone legally for commercial purposes, you have to follow the basic federal rules and regulations. This is regardless of where you're at in the country. You're always going to be under these federal regulations. Most of them are completely common sense. So it says maintain visual line of sight, or at least have a pretty good idea where your drone is at all times.
So you don't have to climb the tree.
Exactly. Try to figure out where it is or keep line of sight so you don't have to go up in the tree looking for it. If you've spent money on something, are you less likely to just say, it's probably all right, I'll just fly it. I know the site's 3 miles away, but I'll have to, I won't have to move the truck.
So
Yes, sir.
it really does seem to me like in this example of that big tract of land, that if there's no place, if it's very heavily wooded, that you couldn't maintain line of sight.
It's going to depend on where you're at.
So how do you do it?
A good rule of thumb, like he said, if you didn't hear him, like if you got a large section of land, like 100, 200 acres, and it's heavily wooded, how do you keep good line of sight on it? You want to try to find the high point that you can launch from.
That's why I said the tree.
Yep. And if you're on a high point of the land, you've got a better way to keep that in line of sight. We're probably also going to be flying about 150 to 200 feet. So it's going to be up over the trees. If you've got a lot of elevation changes, you may need to do a couple of different launch spots just to be able to keep, line of sight on the drone a little better. And that way, it's not getting away from you. So maintain visual line of sight. That's one of the regulations they make you follow. Also, don't fly over 400 feet above ground level. Unless you spend enough money to have like the same LiDAR sensor that an airplane would have, which you're just wasting money, you're not going to need to go over 400 feet. Probably about 150 to 200 feet is going to be the range you would operate for most stuff in as far as land surveying. So you're not going to have to worry about that one too much. What you're doing is already setting you up to pass that federal regulation. This is a big one. Obtain permission to fly in controlled airspace. It's as easy as an app on your phone. So you literally, I used to plug this up and we would get airspace authorization just to show you how fast that it worked. But then I got a nasty gram because I actually wasn't flying those airspace authorizations. And I was like, oh. So there is a human on this somewhere. All right. So you're just going to have to take my word for it. It takes about 30 seconds. There's several apps on your phone. You can get OpenSky. You can get, I use a Loft air control, and it's as easy as just picking out where you want to fly. It's going to tell you what airspace you're in, and you just like look for little circles to see if you're in a shaded area. And if you are, you ask for permission. And even if you want to go higher than what the grid is telling you can fly, you can still put in for permission to go higher. If you write it good, you shouldn't have any problem getting some of your permissions as well. And it sounds like it's a lot worse than it is. It's actually a pretty quick process. They've really streamlined this compared to what it was in like 2015, 2016.
When you do
Yes,
that,
sir.
What, are you asking for permission to fly everywhere is within a certain radius or a certain dot that you specify?
Yes, you will put in a radius, and it's usually good to put it in a good enough radius to where you're going to cover your whole site. And what usually happens on the apps is when you put in your coordinate, it's going to come up with a little box, and then you can adjust that box over your site. So you know you've got the permission for the sites you need. Also, one thing I really like about air control is if you've got a KML at your site anyway, you can go on their website and you can actually upload that KML and it will put the box on there for you to make sure that you've got permission to fly exactly where you need to on that site. Let's see, don't have sustained flight over people and vehicles. That's one of those common sense things. Can you fly over the roadway? You can't have sustained flight. So you couldn't put your drone up and hover over the middle of I-20. They might frown on that. But if we needed to map something on the other side of I-20 and this was our best launch spot, we could have that single pass over the roadway to get out to where we need to fly to. You just can't have sustained flight over it. Let's see, don't fly in the clouds. You want to be 500 feet below or 2,000 feet horizontal away.
What if you're surveying the road?
If you're surveying the road, that's a good question. Depending on what you're using, usually you can do corridor scans along the sides of the roads, along the median, and along the other side of the road, and it's going to collect enough data from those flights to fill everything in the middle in. That's a good question, because we used to do that all the time, mapping crash scenes, because we would go out, we would paint everything, and then maybe a week later we'd go out and we'd fly it, and we didn't want to fly over the open or the active roadway, and we didn't want to go through the trouble of shutting the roadway back down. Fly those edges and along the median, and you'll get enough to fill those gaps in, and you're still complying with the federal regulations. As far as the cloud stuff, that's mainly something good to remember for your Part 107 test. That's one of those common sense things. If you go outside and you're trying to get pictures or LiDAR for a survey, and the clouds are so low that your drone will go in the cloud, are you going to get pictures or LiDAR? No. If you're unable to work, you're probably have a cloud base that's a little bit too low for you to be doing something with. That's one of those common sense things. All right, become a certificated remote pilot, as the FAA calls it, to fly for commercial use. Every flight that you're not doing just for fun needs it, so land surveying would need it. Let's say that you want to buy a drone, but you are just dead set on having a remote pilot license. You don't want to fly the drone, you just want to benefit from it. Do you have to have that license to own a drone and use it in your business? No, as long as whoever is going to be the pilot in command has a license, you're good to go. We had a guy that he hasn't got his license yet. He's took delivery of his drone. He has somebody that kind of works part-time for him. And if he needs to do flights in the interim, he said he'll just call him and he can come out. And then he's the remote pilot in command and he's actually flying the drone. So there is ways that you can still do what you need to do if you wind up having a drone before you have your license. And at the bottom here, as far as your regulations, in a nutshell, the FAA could have just said to use common sense. Why didn't the FAA tell you just to use common sense? Well, that's good. They don't use real good common sense at some government agencies. Since we're being videotaped at the moment, I will say that the FAA is a fantastic organization full of caring and understanding and knowledgeable individuals. But if they just said, hey, do this on your own and use common sense and go do your drone stuff, would people have done that? No. So that's where the testing process comes in. They want you to know enough about the federal airspace system that you're not interfering with crewed aviation or manned aviation. That's kind of what it boils down to. They're just trying to keep us away from planes so we don't, so our 3-pound drone doesn't bring down, like a 747 or something. All right, so if I want to get my, yes, sir.
I used to read about program flight paths do you have to, do you have to actually personally pilot and control it all the time, or can you program the drone to fly a predetermined path?
You can program it.
This coordinate,
Yep.
this coordinate, this coordinate.
Yeah, the question was, do you always have to fly it manually, or can you have like a pre-programmed flight deal? And you can pre-program it, and we'll get to that here in just a second and kind of show you a couple options for that. But yeah, it's getting easier and easier to fly these things. But if I want to get my remote pilot license and I don't have one, realistically, it's going to take me anywhere from 5 to 10 hours of studying to get knowledgeable enough with the regulations and memorize what I need to and be able to recognize stuff on a sectional chart. And that's going to be good enough usually to be able to go take my test. You can do it in 1 week or 2 weeks of studying, depending on how much free time you have. It doesn't take forever to get your remote pilot license. It takes about $175 to take the test, so you want to be prepared for it because you don't want to waste $175, of course. But you don't have to spend months and months and months on this. You can do it in 1 or 2 weeks. There's 60 questions. All the questions are what I like to call multiple guess. So if you have no idea what the question is, you've still got, like a 33% chance, right? Because there's 3 answers. One of the answers on any test that you've ever taken is usually so ridiculous that you can throw out. So now we're down to 50-50. You only got to get 60 right. So there's 75 questions on the test. There's 60 questions on the test. You need 70%, which is 42 you have to get right. So as you're taking your test, you make your little tick marks on the side, and when you feel pretty good about, the number of tick marks being 42 or greater, it's probably about time to turn your test in. Yes, sir.
What accuracy level of an object on the ground was there?
We do have the error towards the end, but it is very accurate. But it's going to depend on what kind of environment you're in. Now, if you're flying over a hard surface like the roadway or a parking lot, something like that, you get really good accuracy. If you're in an open field, your accuracy is not quite as good, but not bad. And then if you're in like a really heavily vegetated area, your accuracy, of course, is going to get higher or lower rather, but it's still going to be in a acceptable range. But yeah, we got all about the accuracy coming up here in just a second.
Are you talking about LiDAR or photogrammetry?
LiDAR mostly, but you can get just as accurate results with photogrammetry. It's just a little bit different wording as far as what you're trying to achieve. All right, as far as SmartDrone, all of our team members have a remote pilot license. A lot of them didn't have a remote pilot license when they got hired, especially like some of the people in like research and development and stuff like that. They may need to get a remote pilot license, and we have a study guide that's completely free. That there's a QR code that's going to come up here in a second. You can scan on your phone and download it, or you can come by the SmartDrone booth and, I know we're salespeople, but we don't bite. If you just come up by the booth and just grab the card that says Part 107, stick your fingers in your ears and just run. You can do that too. It's not going to, after 10 years on the road well, I shouldn't say bad stuff about Spartanburg, but there's better cities here. Y'all know that. We can be real. We're all from South Carolina. After 11 years of that, my feelings don't hurt easily. So grab the card, just scream at me and run away, and that's fine. You're not, like I said, you're not going to hurt my feelings whatsoever. But that's a free study guide. Follow it. We've got a lot of good links on there to free resources that you can use to get your Part 107, and then you only have your $175 for the test fee. All right, exactly what's on the test. Regulations are about 15 to 25%. What you will find on the test is there's actually very little on the test about drones, even though it is a remote pilot drone test, right? It makes perfect sense. Damn, see, I forgot I was on video again. It does, it's a wonderfully constructed test. Absolutely nothing wrong with the setup. The regulations, anything else would be too much. They did a great job. Right? All right, but there's about 15 to 25% of the test is on regulations. And that's going to be primarily the stuff we looked at. You know, don't fly over 400 feet, the cloud stuff, and all that. You're going to have some about 15 to 25% that's going to be airspace regulations. That's going to be stuff about, you know, if you're trying to fly at this location, you know, will you have to get access or authorization to fly, stuff like that. Reading a sectional chart, which can be a little bit aggravating, but if you learn enough to be able to decipher it on the test, you will never look at a sectional chart ever again as far as your drone piloting, unless you just like start studying for like your private pilot because you like drones so much. You'll never use a sectional chart as far as the airspace stuff for drones because it's just too quick and easy to do it on your phone. Weather is one that's aggravating. You're going to have about 11 to 16% of questions that are weather related. You're going to have stuff on there that's going to ask you about like the mature stages of a thunderstorm and ice pellets and aviation weather reports and all this stuff that's it makes a lot of sense to manned aviation. As far as drones, they could have just said, look outside, and if it's raining, maybe pick another day. But then you couldn't get your 11 to 16% that you need for the test. So there is some on there about weather, loading, and performance. You'll have a little bit on here about that. Most of that's about fixed wing, because the reason that that's on there with fixed wing aircraft is because you will be able to pilot something like a Wingtra, which is one of those fixed wing drones. You can pilot that and a quadcopter drone with that remote pilot license. So they do include some fixed wing stuff about like load and performance and center of mass and stuff like that. Airport operations, about 35 to 45% of the test is on airport operations. You can get by with watching the YouTube video that we've got on our study guide, and you'll learn enough about all this that you can, confidently go in and take the test. When I actually got my Part 107 license, I was not at SmartDrone, but I had used some of the same resources on YouTube as they recommend to everybody else. And that's what I used to pass my Part 107 with. I took it the one time, I made like a 96 or a 97, so I did pretty good. A guy that I used to work with took it at the same time, and a few days apart, he told me that he got a 98, so I lied and told him I got 100. But, we're among friends here, so I'll tell you, 97, I used no paid resources. I just did some of the stuff, the same stuff we give you that direct you to you on YouTube. So it can be done pretty easily. All right, after the test, and here's the study guide I was telling you about. You can scan that with your phone. You can come by the booth and pick up the card with the QR code. It's all going to go to the same study guide. And there's a couple of different points on this if you don't flash it now, or maybe you're still in that phase where you don't trust me yet. But by the end, you've warmed up to me a little bit. It'll be at the end too, and you can scan it then as well. After the test, you do have to do recurrent training. It used to be that the test cost $150 to take, and every 2 years, your recurrent training was you just went back and retook the drone test again and paid another $150. So that could get costly over a couple of research. What they've done now is they've made the drone test $175. So it's a little bit more expensive, but now the recurrent training you do online and it's free. So you still, every 2 years, you'll log into the recurrent, remote pilot license stuff on the FAA's website. I think there's about a 2-hour online course that you'll sit through, and then you'll take a test. It's about 10 or 20 questions, I believe. You do have to have 100, but you can take it as many times as you want. And I'm not 100% sure the questions change. So it's just one of those things that if the FAA sees that you're going through the motion to stay current, you're not going to have any problem with keeping up with your remote pilot license. This is the SmartDrone study guide that I was kind of telling you about. If you download this, it's in a PDF format. There's some links on here. It's going to show you how to register with the FAA to take it. If you decide you want to take your test, you have to go and register and get I think they call it like a flight tracking number or something like that, to where they track you through the process. Shows you how to do that. It shows you how to register with your test facility. It shows you how to schedule the test, some tips for taking your test, and then applying for the license. After you take the test, and in my case, you get your 100% score, you still have to log back onto the website and actually apply for the license. So just because you took the test and passed, remember to go on and apply for it. Because if you don't, within about a 2-week period, you have to go back and retake the test. So it's better to do it as quickly as you can. It's also got some videos and some other helpful information here. All this is free. You can access it online. And you can use this and go get your pilot license with no difficulties whatsoever. This is the video that we kind of direct you to. This is a guy named Tony Northrup. This video has like 12 or 13 million views, I believe, at this point. The video is a little bit older. So I will say that some of the stuff on the regulations have changed, but everything else is completely spot on. They haven't changed anything with sectional charts, weather, airport operations. He explains it really well. It's a very well-made video. He does it in a way that doesn't make you, want to gouge your eyes out because you're having to watch a video about how to read Latin long on a sectional chart. So it's a great video. Like I said, the regulations have changed just a little bit. So just kind of find a PDF or go to the FAA's website and just make sure the regulations are more up to date before you take your test. Really the biggest changes that you'll see from his video to the regulations now is they've changed night flying a little bit. It used to be that you could not fly at night. Now you can fly at night if you have a flashing strobe on your drone that's visible for at least 3 miles. So that's one of the changes to regulations. They've changed some other stuff about remote ID that you'll see pop up on your test as well.